She said her name in the same sentence as Michael Jordan's. 20,000 people believed her. 2 hours later, none of them could look her in the eye. This is the story of the night the talking stopped and the scoreboard started doing the shouting instead. Before a single possession was played, before the ball even left the referee's hands for the opening tip, the building was already a powder keg. 20,000 fans crammed shoulder to shoulder, and every single one of them had shown up believing they were about to witness something historic. Not a basketball game, a coronation, a statement, a changing of the guard, live, in real time, with the whole sports world watching. And in the locker room, getting taped up, getting locked in, was a young woman who was 100% certain she was about to deliver exactly what that crowd came for. She had no idea what was actually waiting for her on the other end of that tunnel. What played out over the next few hours wasn't a basketball game so much as a public reckoning. It was trash talk meeting consequences head-on. It was a bold, headline-grabbing prediction slamming face first into cold, unforgiving reality. And it was one of the most explosive rivalries in the history of women's sports, taking a hairpin turn that literally nobody in that arena saw coming. Not the die-hard fans, not the professional analysts getting paid to predict this stuff, not even Angel Reese's most loyal supporters sitting courtside with signs already made. By the time the final horn sounded, the arena that had been deafening all night had gone completely silent. 20,000 voices gone. And standing in the middle of that silence wasn't the player who'd been doing all the talking for the previous 48 hours. It was the other one. To understand exactly how a night like that happens, you can't start at tip-off. You have to rewind 2 full days, because this story doesn't begin with a missed shot. It begins with a microphone, a press conference, and a comparison so bold it set the entire sports internet on fire before anyone had even laced up. There's confident, and then there's whatever Angel Reese did at that pregame presser. She sat down in front of a wall of cameras, completely composed, completely calm, and drew a direct line between herself and Michael Jordan. Now, to be fair, she was careful with her wording. She framed it around brand power, cultural impact, competitive fire, not raw skill. But nobody was fooled by the careful framing. The implication landed exactly the way she wanted it to land. She was telling the world she was the real face of the WNBA, the real magnetic force, the one actually pulling eyeballs to women's basketball, not Caitlin Clark. Her. Context matters here, because this wasn't some random soundbite pulled out of thin air. This landed at the absolute peak of the Reese-Clark rivalry, a storyline that had been building since their college days, had followed both of them into the professional ranks, and was already being picked apart on every major sports show in the country. Reese had spent the whole season leaning into the noise. She knew exactly how to stay in the conversation, how to keep her name trending, how to feed the machine. And up to that point, credit where it's due, it had worked. But invoking Michael Jordan changes the entire equation. The second you say that name, you're not talking about brand deals or follower counts anymore. You're talking about the single greatest basketball player who has ever lived. And when you use that name to elevate yourself above someone who is, by nearly every measurable stat on the floor, outproducing you, you've just handed every critic in America a loaded weapon and pointed it at your own head. For weeks leading up to that press conference, chatter had already been building online about whether Reese's confidence had tipped over from competitive fire into something closer to overreach. Plenty of people felt she was constructing a persona out of controversy rather than consistency. And with one press conference, all of that simmering online noise exploded into a full-blown national conversation. The internet didn't just react. It detonated. But none of that online chaos hit quite as hard as what happened next on national television. Because if Angel Reese's press conference was the spark, Stephen A. Smith was the gasoline. He came out on ESPN with the kind of energy you only see from someone who genuinely cannot believe what he just heard with his own ears. He didn't come out screaming right away either. He built it methodically, almost like a prosecutor laying out evidence piece by piece before delivering the final verdict. And the verdict was blunt. Michael Jordan is not you. And you are not Caitlin Clark. What made his breakdown land so hard wasn't just the volume. It was the precision. He wasn't dismissing Reese as a player entirely. He was going straight at the logic of the comparison itself. His argument was simple and sharp. Caitlin Clark is building her legacy on undeniable, cold, hard skill. Every record, every no-look assist, every deep pull-up three under pressure. That's basketball speaking for itself. No press conference required. Angel Reese, he argued, had been building something different. A brand constructed on drama, viral clips, and manufactured conflict, rather than the kind of night-in, night-out dominance that earns a seat at the table with the true legends of the game. And then came the line that, in hindsight, sounds less like a hot take and more like a prophecy. Stephen A. stared straight down the barrel of the camera and said if you write checks with your mouth that your game can't cash, the court is going to collect. He wasn't being subtle about it either. He said if she went out there and actually backed up the size of her claims, he'd be the very first person to give her that credit publicly. But if she didn't, the embarrassment would be historic, and everyone would remember exactly where it happened. 48 hours later, the court collected. Walking into that arena that night felt less like heading to a basketball game and more like stepping into a pressure chamber. The crowd was wound up before either team had even finished warm-ups. There was a hostility hanging in the air, the specific kind that only exists when tens of thousands of people have collectively decided they're not just spectators tonight, they're participants. They had already picked their villain, and they wanted her to feel it from the very first second she stepped on the hardwood. That villain was Caitlin Clark. Every single time she touched the ball during warm-ups, a wave of noise rolled through the building. Not cheers, jeers. Signs went up. Chants broke out. The energy in that arena was overwhelming, deliberately intimidating, and aimed at exactly one player. The crowd wasn't just cheering for their team anymore. They were waging outright psychological warfare on the visiting star, and they were throwing everything they had at her. What they didn't account for is what happens when that kind of pressure runs into someone who doesn't just survive it, someone who actually feeds off it. There's a very specific type of competitor who gets more dangerous the louder a room gets against them. The hostility doesn't rattle that kind of player. It sharpens them. It narrows their focus down to a razor's edge. And while 20,000 people were doing everything humanly possible to get inside Caitlin Clark's head that night, she was quietly doing what she always does in moments like that. She was getting ready to go to work. On the other side of the floor, Angel Reese was playing exactly the role she'd scripted for herself. The people's champion, the hometown favorite, the one who was finally going to cash the check she'd written at that press conference. The energy in the building belonged to her. The signs had her name on them. The chants were built around her. All she had to do now was deliver. The opening minutes gave the crowd exactly what they came for, or at least that's what it looked like on the surface. The noise was deafening from the opening tip. Every home team possession brought the building to its feet. Every time Clark touched the ball, the boos rained down so loud the broadcast cameras looked like they were physically vibrating. It was the kind of atmosphere that fills highlight reels before a single point even goes on the board. But basketball has a way of cutting straight through noise, and it doesn't take long to do it. In those early minutes, something subtle was already starting to shift underneath the surface. Reese was positioning aggressively, demanding the ball in the post the way she always does, trying to physically impose her will on the game. But something wasn't quite clicking. The rhythm was a beat off. The finishing wasn't crisp. Plays that should have been automatic were taking an extra half second, an extra ounce of effort, and they weren't consistently falling. Meanwhile, Clark was doing what Clark does. Quiet at first, patient, reading the defense, hunting for gaps, making the smart pass instead of the flashy one. She wasn't trying to make a statement in the first quarter. She was gathering intel, solving the puzzle in real time, setting something up that the crowd wouldn't see coming until it was already too late. The building was too loud to notice the shift yet. The score was close enough that nobody was worried. But anyone actually watching closely, any coach, any analyst, anyone who'd seen enough basketball to recognize what was really happening beneath the surface, could tell the foundation for what was coming was already being poured. Nobody, though, could have predicted just how dramatic the collapse on one side and the eruption on the other was about to get. The second quarter is where the entire tone of the night shifted in a way even the loudest home crowd couldn't ignore anymore. Clark started opening up her game in ways the defense simply wasn't built to handle. She pulled up from a full step behind the logo, a shot so deep and so cold-blooded that even the people who'd shown up specifically to boo her couldn't help but register what they'd just watched. It silenced an entire section of the arena for a beat, and in a building that loud, even one beat of silence says everything. Then came the passing. There's racking up assists, And then there's whatever Clark was doing in that second quarter, threading the ball through gaps that shouldn't have existed, hitting teammates at angles that defied logic, delivering passes in such perfect stride that the receiving player didn't even need to gather themselves before finishing at the rim. The stat crew on the broadcast was struggling to keep pace with her. Every single time it looked like she'd hit a rhythm, she found another gear underneath it. What made it even more remarkable wasn't just the highlight reel stuff. It was everything happening in between. She was flying into traffic to fight for boards. She was absorbing contact from players with 4 or 5 inches on her and not flinching once. She was doing the grinding, unglamorous work that championship-level players do specifically when they want to send a message, not just to the opposing bench, but to every single person in that building who'd spent the night questioning whether she belonged on that stage at all. By the time the third quarter tipped off, the broadcast flashed a stat line that made the announcing crew stop mid-sentence. A career-high triple-double. Points, assists, rebounds, all landing at numbers she'd never hit before in a single professional game, and doing it in that building, on that night, against that opponent, under that exact amount of pressure. The timing could not have been scripted any better if a Hollywood writer had sat down and built it from scratch. She had answered every single piece of psychological warfare thrown at her. The hostile crowd, the pregame trash talk, the Jordan comparison, not with a single word, not with a single gesture toward the crowd, but with the single most complete performance of her professional career. Wherever Stephen A. Smith was watching that game from, he had to be feeling fully vindicated. And then there was Angel Reese. While all of that was unfolding on one end of the floor, while Clark was assembling one of the most jaw-dropping individual performances the league had seen in years, Reese was fighting a completely different kind of battle on the other end, and losing it in the most painful, public way imaginable. It started with one miss. A wide-open layup, the exact kind of shot that falls 99 times out of 100. She had position. She had the angle. She had the entire runway in front of her. The ball went up. It didn't go in. The crowd let out a collective exhale, the bench winced, and everybody assumed it was just one of those things. Basketball has misses. Every player has them. Then it happened again. Another wide-open layup, another miss. This one even more straightforward than the first, closer to the rim, less contested, with no real excuse for it not to fall. It rattled off the rim, and this time the mood in the building noticeably shifted. There was a pause, a tension, the specific kind of silence that's really asking a question nobody wants to say out loud. And then a third time. 3 wide-open missed layups inside 6 minutes. In a game with this much on the line, in a building this charged up, against an opponent who'd been publicly called out and was now publicly proving every word of that call-out true. Reese's close-range shooting numbers over the previous 4 games had already raised eyebrows among analysts, with reports flagging she was converting less than a quarter of her attempts near the basket in that stretch. But watching it unfold live, in real time, in this exact context, hit completely differently. The coach's post-game press conference said everything without technically saying anything at all. Long pauses between answers. Careful, diplomatic language about getting good looks and having our chances. The specific brand of coach speak that only comes out when someone is working very, very hard not to say what they're actually thinking out loud. He was frustrated. Anybody paying attention could see it plainly. But the most telling moment of the entire night didn't come from the podium. It came from what Angel Reese did after the final buzzer. She didn't speak to a single reporter. In a game where she'd compared herself to Michael Jordan less than 48 hours earlier, in a matchup the entire sports world had tuned into specifically because of that comparison, with the pressure and the stakes higher than they'd ever been, she walked straight past the media and said absolutely nothing. There's one specific play from that final quarter that deserves to stand entirely on its own, because nothing else from that night captures the shift quite as cleanly as this single sequence. The game was in its closing stretch. The lead had changed hands more than once. The crowd was at a fever pitch, desperate, loud, still believing. And then Caitlin Clark caught the ball on the wing. What happened next took about 3 seconds total. A hesitation move that froze her defender completely in place. A crossover that sent that same defender stumbling backward, off balance. A stride back into open space that gave her all the room she needed. And then the shot. Not from the arc, well past it. A deep, heavily contested logo 3 that split the net clean, like she'd been draining that exact shot in an empty gym every single day for years. She didn't celebrate. She didn't scream. She didn't point at anybody or say a single word. She just turned around, looked out at the crowd, and let the silence do all the talking for her. 20,000 people, the same 20,000 who'd been howling for hours straight, who'd made signs, who'd chanted her name in mockery all night, who'd thrown absolutely everything they had at rattling her, went completely silent at the exact same moment. Not gradually, instantly, like someone had reached up and hit mute on the entire building at once. Fans in attendance later described actually being able to hear the arena itself in a way you never can during a packed, live game. The specific kind of silence that only exists after enormous noise, heavier than regular quiet because of everything that came right before it. This is exactly what Stephen A. Smith had warned about. He never predicted the specific play or the specific second it would happen, but he'd predicted the principle underneath it. He'd said that real greatness doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need a press conference or a Jordan comparison to back it up. It just shows up, does the work, and lets the scoreboard speak. And that night, the scoreboard spoke very, very loudly in a room full of people who'd suddenly lost their voices. Post-game press conferences after a tough loss are never comfortable, but this one carried a very specific kind of awkwardness that was almost impossible to look away from. The coach stood at the podium and worked through the questions carefully. He talked about fight, about promise, about being right there in it. He gave reporters just enough to fill a quote without giving away what he was actually feeling underneath it. When someone brought up the missed layups down the stretch, he pivoted almost instantly to team execution, screens that didn't get set, boards that didn't get crashed. He was doing exactly what a coach does when he's trying to protect his player while privately processing genuine frustration of his own. Meanwhile, the player at the center of it all was nowhere near a microphone. Angel Reese, who'd been front and center before the game, who'd made absolutely sure the entire country heard her thoughts on her place in basketball history, who'd fed the entire media cycle with bold, headline-ready quotes for 48 straight hours, was a complete no-show at post-game availability. The contrast didn't need any extra commentary. It spoke entirely for itself. Online, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect, and honestly, probably worse. Clips of the missed layups were circulating within minutes of the final buzzer. Side-by-side edits of her pre-game Jordan comparison next to her post-game no-show spread across every platform imaginable. Stephen A. Smith's original breakdown was getting reshared everywhere, time-stamped, with pure told-you-so energy attached from every corner of the sports internet. The conversation stopped being about one single game. It became a referendum on hype versus substance, on what it actually means to be the face of a league, on whether a brand built on controversy has a ceiling, and what happens when you hit it in front of 20,000 people and a national audience. Now, it's worth pausing here and saying this clearly, because it matters. One bad game, or even a rough stretch of games, doesn't define an entire career. Athletes go through cold spells. Confidence is a fragile thing even for elite competitors, and the pressure of a genuinely high-stakes moment can get to even the toughest players mentally. There's been chatter suggesting Reese may have been carrying more of the weight of this rivalry narrative than she ever let on publicly, that the scrutiny was heavier than her bravado made it look from the outside. None of that is confirmed, but it does track with the kind of performance you see from someone who's trying too hard to prove a point instead of simply playing their game. Those missed layups weren't just missed layups. They were a symptom of something that had been building for a while. Step back for a second from all the drama, the viral clips, the Stephen A. soundbites, the endless online arguments, and look at what that single night actually revealed about where this rivalry genuinely stands and where it's headed next. The Clark-Reese dynamic has been the single most commercially valuable storyline in women's basketball for over 2 years running now. It started in college. It followed both of them straight into the pros. And it has generated more media coverage, more debate, more casual fan interest than arguably anything else in WNBA history. Both players have benefited from it enormously. The league has benefited from it enormously. It has put women's basketball in front of audiences who had genuinely never watched a WNBA game before in their lives. On that level, regardless of how you feel about either player personally, it has been a genuinely significant force for the sport. But this particular game exposed something the surrounding narrative had been quietly glossing over for a long time. There's a gap, a measurable, undeniable gap between where these two players currently stand in terms of pure on-court production. Clark's triple-double, a career high in a pressure cooker environment, in a hostile building, against a crowd that wanted nothing more in the entire world than to watch her fail. That's the kind of performance that goes straight into a player's legacy file. It gets referenced for years. It's exactly the kind of game that separates players who are good from players who are genuinely elite. Reese, meanwhile, is standing at a crossroads. She probably never wanted to hit this publicly. The missed layups are fixable. Shooting efficiency issues get worked through in the gym all the time. That's nothing new in this sport. But the brand positioning, the Jordan comparison, the face of the league framing, the manufactured rivalry content, that requires a completely different kind of recalibration. Because now, every single time Reese steps onto a court against Clark, that press conference is in the room with her. That comparison is in the room with her. That post-game silence is in the room with her. The expectation has been set publicly and permanently, and expectations set at that level don't quietly disappear on their own. What makes where this goes next genuinely fascinating is that both possible outcomes are compelling in their own right. If Reese responds, if she puts together the kind of sustained, dominant stretch of performances that finally backs up the confidence she's been projecting all along, this becomes a redemption arc that writes itself, and the sports world loves nothing more than a real comeback story. But if she doesn't, if the shooting struggles keep bleeding into big moments and the signature performances keep slipping through her fingers, the narrative around her becomes something a whole lot harder to shake off. Stephen A. Smith saw this coming. He said it plainly, on camera, before a single possession had even been played. And while plenty of people brushed his take off as just another hot take from a commentator who was always going to side with the bigger mainstream story, the court ended up making his entire case for him more definitively than any broadcast segment ever could. This rivalry isn't dead. If anything, it might be more compelling right now than it was before that night, because now there's genuine stakes attached to it. Genuine consequences. A genuine open question about what Angel Reese does with everything that just happened. The cameras will be rolling the next time these two share a court. The weight of that night, the missed layups, the silence, the empty podium, the Jordan comparison, will be sitting right there in the building with them. Only one of them looks comfortable carrying that weight right now. The other one has some real work ahead of her.